Our guest speakers have come from very diverse backgrounds, and I'll let them introduce themselves in the order that they will be speaking. What I would like to say to start, just to coin a little bit the talk this afternoon, is that since 2003 or actually way before that, depending on how old you are, but there has been an evolution in what was known back then as learning objects. And it was an era where we started creating repositories where we would deposit a unit of learning, and we would describe it with metadata, and we'd create norms and rules about how to access it and how to describe it and how to make it interoperable and all these things, and we created something very, very complex. And nowadays we're dealing with what's known as open educational resources. And people are asking, well, how different are OERs from the learning objects of back then? And this has created a conversation, and it was interesting to find out the answer is really, well, there are many answers. As many answers as the people you ask the question to. But what boils down from the discussion are two things. The first one is that they are open. Ever since we decided to declare at the onset what you can do with a resource, the whole picture changes completely. So that was the very first and most important difference. The other difference, though, if you go back to 2003, we were in Web 2 1.0 at the time, and people could not contribute to the web. What has changed since then is that we have publishing platforms that are crowdsourced, platforms that are very, very powerful with algorithms like YouTube, like Google, and people can publish, and suddenly we don't need any more of the very large repositories. So I would like you to think about this evolution in terms of ownership and authorship. How does it change? And we'll listen to our very interesting panelists this afternoon. Please come in. We haven't started yet. So to start with, I'll let Edward speak first.
Hi, I'm Ed Rock. I'm the Director of Open Course Initiatives here at Penn. We have done, that is to say, that's the Director of our partnership with Coursera. We are one of the founding 4 partners of Coursera, and in the last 2 years we have created and broadcast, I guess is the word, or streamed 30 unique courses through the Coursera platform. We've had a total enrollment of somewhere around 2 million enrollees, and in terms of completions, if that's the metric you like, we've had around 100,000 people complete our courses, which as an exercise in public education is quite amazing, and for the people involved in it, quite wonderful. My day job, as it were, is as a professor of corporate law at the law school. And when I first took on this job, I went around the university talking about what we were doing and about the partnership. A common question I got was, why are you doing this? And often the emphasis was, why are you, who knows nothing about online learning or pedagogy, why are you the one who's doing this? And the short answer to that question was that my legal background was not unimportant in figuring out how to make this move forward. And one of the questions that arose very early in our partnership with Coursera and in our initiative revolved around ownership of intellectual property as well as copyright concerns. So just to sort of give the frame, the university partnerships with Coursera are both non-exclusive, so there are quite a few universities that are partners of Coursera as well as partners of edX. Non-exclusive, and the intellectual property, the courses, do not belong to Coursera. They belong to the university partners. And then they are licensed to Coursera, and there's an arrangement with Coursera, a revenue share, if there should ever be any revenues. In some cases there have been revenues, not many, not enough. within the university, early on, we realized that if we developed courses without first specifying the ownership and control of the intellectual property, that we were asking for trouble. Because the background copyright law on this is really quite unclear. One could take the view that the courses that are created by faculty members belong to the faculty. It's a view one could take. On the other hand, to the extent that faculty members are doing this as part of their job, to the extent that the university is putting in resources, it is equally possible to analyze this as what is known as a work for hire, in which case all property rights, all intellectual property rights will belong to the university. Many places that have had problems in terms of negotiating the relationship between the university and their faculty over the ownership and control of their MOOCs are places that didn't specify up front who owned the content, who had rights to control the content, what happened to it. Okay? So we decided that before we would develop any courses, we would set up a structure to govern those questions so that faculty members would know up front what they were getting into. One other background detail about how we approached it. Early on, we took the position that preparing a MOOC should be done in addition to normal teaching responsibilities and not in place of. Okay? So we give no teaching relief for the development of MOOCs. And the primary reason for that is the pretty simple one, that we did not ever want to be in the position of saying to one of our students or his or her parents that you can't study with the great Professor X because she's off preparing a MOOC that we're going to give away for free. Okay? That was, given what we charge our students, that was not a conversation we ever wanted to have. So we've done it from the beginning through as an overload. And that has varied from school to school. Most of the courses are developed in an internal grants model. We are a very decentralized university. An internal grants model in which the provost's office and the school from which the course is coming share the costs. Okay? Our costs, just to get this out on the table, the costs, we budget around $50,000 per course. And the elements of that are a stipend for the instructor, teaching assistants, copyright, and videotaping. Okay, those are the four main elements of it. The copyright costs vary. From a copyright perspective, and now I'm talking about copyrighted materials contained within the course. From a copyright perspective, the way to think about MOOCs is much more as a publishing venture than as a teaching venture. You can use in your own classes all sorts of copyrighted materials and not infringe copyright. On the other hand, as soon as you put it into a MOOC and stream it all over the world, if you have third-party protected content in there, there may well be a fair use exception for some of that content, but for other content it clearly is not. And so the way Martha Brogan and her colleagues in the library advised us to think about this, as well as Robert Terrell in the General Counsel's office, was think about as if you're publishing a book. And what kind of permissions would you need for the copyrighted material that you're including in the book? And so for our courses working with the library, where we've tried to avoid using copyrighted content, but in some cases you can't avoid it. In some cases, for instance, if it's a scientific course, you may need graphs. We have a Greek and Roman mythology course where he has certain images that he wants to use. Where we can't avoid using copyrighted material, we then make sure that we license it from the copyright holder before moving forward. Okay. All right, so how do we, given that we have to both sort out control rights, ownership rights, and cash flow rights, how do we do it? And this, again, different universities have approached this in different ways. With respect to the course, it's useful to think about the course content and the course expression. Okay, the course content is all the information that an instructor is trying to convey in the course of the course. The expression, we, like most of the Coursera partner schools and the Coursera platform, we primarily use videotapes plus assessments, discussion boards, right, and other assignments. The videotapes, which the university pays for the production of, the videotapes are a second element. And basically, the agreement we strike in the online course agreement is that the content belongs to the faculty member, whereas the expression belongs to the university. Okay? Now, there are a couple of features to that. What that means is that if the faculty member decides to go off and teach at the University of Pittsburgh and wants to develop a MOOC for Pittsburgh, the faculty member is free to do so, to take the content, re-record the videos, and teach the same course for Pittsburgh as she was teaching for Penn. What she can't do is take the videotapes which belong to Penn. The faculty member licenses the use of the content to the university so that the university can then has the right then to license it to Coursera, because Coursera needs permission to run the course on the platform. The university licenses the videotapes to the faculty member for use in her teaching, for use in various things relating to her teaching and her research, subject to general university conflict of interest rules. So the principal place where that makes a difference is if the faculty member now wants to take the MOOC and run it not, say, on the Coursera platform, but on another platform. The university has a veto over that because the videotapes belong to the university. They're licensed to the faculty member, but only for teaching and research uses and not, it's pretty clear, for use on a different platform that would require university permission. One of the questions that comes up is who controls whether the course is offered or re-offered. And here, the legal entitlement in the agreement is that the university has the ultimate say in whether the course is offered or re-offered. Our practice has been and will continue to be that we will consult with the faculty member as to whether the faculty member wants to re-offer it, because we want heavy faculty involvement in the online courses. And so far, we've waited actually for faculty members to request re-offering of MOOCs. But the legal entitlement ultimately is that the university could offer the course over the objection of a faculty member. Now, to take the example of a faculty member going to a different university, we wouldn't be likely to do that, because why would we want to build up Maureen's reputation having moved to the University of Pittsburgh after teaching at the University of Pennsylvania? But the situation to keep in mind is we need to make this an economically sustainable venture. And ultimately, I think people expect that most of the courses will never make any money at all, and hope that we may have one or two courses that makes enough money through some revenue channel or other, still to be determined, since there are really no decent revenue channels yet, that will support the other courses. And what we want to avoid is it's a renegotiation at the point that it's clear that a course is a moneymaker. Let me get to the money side of it. We provide to the faculty member a stipend to prepare the course of up to $15,000. It's been $15,000 for the courses. The first reoffering, we provide a stipend of $7,500. And then thereafter, there is a basic stipend each time it runs of $1,000. Those schools can offer more. Where our expectation is that by the third offering, the course will more or less run by itself with just occasional interventions by the faculty. In addition to the upfront stipend, we have a revenue share built into the agreement where if the course makes money, then the faculty member is entitled to 30% of net course-related revenues. So now to take the example that we have in mind of a bestseller that actually is going to develop real revenues that will support the whole course, that's a circumstance where the faculty member, 30%, could, and these are all hopes and dreams, could amount to a substantial amount of money. And so while the university on this hypothetical bestseller, the university would have the ability to continue running the course even over the faculty member's objection, the faculty member would nonetheless receive the faculty member's share of revenue. In the legal structure here, the way to think about the university and the faculty member in terms of our agreement, this is how we conceptualized it, is that the university is the position of the movie studio or the publisher or whatever. The faculty member is in the position of the author or the author, I guess is the best way to think about it. And just as a textbook publisher wouldn't dream of publishing a textbook without, and putting in the resources that are involved in publishing a textbook without having both some control over the content as well as a share of the revenue. So too, the faculty member wouldn't dream of publishing a textbook without having some share of the revenues and getting paid something somewhere to do it. There are a variety of other things that we need, that Coursera requires in terms of permissions and assurances that get built into the agreement as well. But that is the basic agreement. Different universities have approached this different ways. In some universities, the university owns the whole thing, content and expression. And in other universities, they've declared that the faculty member owns the whole thing, content and expression. The faculty members are apprised of this up front. So we don't allow any course to go into development until we have a course agreement. I spent a lot of my time explaining the terms of the course agreement to new faculty members. We're also quite open. We have one faculty member who wanted to do a course using Open edX because it's a course on open source, open access, and he wanted to do it on an open platform. And we said, sure, if that's how you want to do it. So one of his IT people, he's at the Morton School, put up a small instance of Open edX, and he's developing the course as an Open edX course. So nobody's forced to develop courses through this process, but the courses that we have and will continue to develop for the Coursera platform are developed pursuant to this basic instruction. So let me stop there.
So good afternoon. My name is Candice Reimers, and I work. It's a PDF.
It's a PDF.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. So I work in our learning and development organization within Google's engineering research group. And over the last year and a half or so, have been working with an open source platform that we had built out, and working in some experiments ourselves we've been running, but also been working really closely with different partners and organizations. I also have to say that I'm a proud Penn alum, and I'm a doctoral candidate here at Penn as well, so go Quakers. Anyways, but I do live in California, but we won't go into my personal life. So how did Google get involved in open courses, massive open online courses? So about 2 years ago, there was the course that came out of Stanford, the artificial intelligence class, and Peter Norvig was one of those professors, he and Sebastian Thrun, that led it, and Peter's on our team. So as he was going through the course, he would come back and share with us this amazing experience, the amazing reach, and the great interactions with the students. Truly inspiring stories that he would share with us. And so when we heard about them, we stepped back and thought about the different types of tools that they were using. So they were using a lot of the infrastructure, YouTube, docs, sites, Gmail, etc. So we decided as a team to come together and piecemeal these together and create basically a framework. We had some content that was available. One of our research scientists had done a course on a Google a Day. He had content that we put into the framework. And we launched this to the world. We had no idea what to expect. Now, previously, my team has been an internal-facing team. We only work with Googlers, and so when we opened it up, it was very scary for us. We didn't know if there'd be interest. We didn't know what the response would be like. We thought maybe we would get 5,000 people. We had 157,000 people show up, which was exciting and very intimidating at the same time. But as the course rolled out for about 2.5 weeks, we saw a lot of areas where we hadn't anticipated, lack of access, the need to contextualize it and provide language options as well. But we also saw really rich discussions on the forums and dialogue, where we had a group of TAs from around the world that would answer questions and help the students. We actually found that the students were helping each other faster and better than we could have, helping contextualize the content and translate as well. So after the course, we stepped back and said, do we want to do this again? It was a big decision for us, and we said, actually, we think that there's something here where other people can leverage this platform and use it and do it on their own. There's so much knowledge around the world and so many other great experts with information to share. What if we developed a platform that others could use? So that's where we did our first initiative. And we opened up an open source platform called Course Builder. So since then, we've launched 6 different courses. We are not in the content delivery phase. It's not a priority for us. Each of these courses that we launch, we're running new experiments. So I've got a team of instructional designers. I myself am a former teacher, so strong educator, and we work closely with the engineers on what we think should be on the platform. We also work with partners to hear what their needs and interests are as well. So we've launched 6 experiments. We've worked with a number of different faculty members, nonprofit organizations, individuals that fill out their courses. And to date, there's been about 100 different courses that have been built out. We've also gone through 6 iterations of the platform. So based on the feedback that we're hearing from the community, we've been trying to build in more robust analytics. We've been integrating social components because we know the social aspect is critical to the success of the courses. We've internationalized it to 40 different languages so the framework can apply to a number of different countries. And we've also tried to make the technology much more accessible to a non-technical audience. So I am not an engineer, and I could set up a course. There's a lot of documentation and resources as well. So last May, edX announced that they were going to open up their platform as well to Open edX, as it had referenced. And as soon as they made that announcement, we started to talk with them to see what their aspirations and visions were. And very soon saw that there's a lot of cohesion and really a shared vision in broadening access to education. So September, we announced a collaboration with Open edX and have been contributing to their open source platform and looking for ways for intersection. And I think really what we feel is really critical at this period of time is providing a lot of different options, trying to create it and make it as open as possible, and really fostering an open education ecosystem. So I want to talk a little bit about open source, but before I do that, I don't want to assume that everyone here knows what open source is. So I actually didn't know what open source was until about 2 years ago when I started to work on this project. So just to get us all on the same playing field. So open source, basically what it is based on the code that the engineers have written, they've made it freely available. So you can modify it, you can customize it, you can redistribute it. So similar to OER resources, it's just the code. But what's more exciting there is the culture that builds around it. So there's a culture of exchange and collaboration and community and really quick iterations and prototyping. And so those are some of the advantages that we see with the open source options. What's different than what we've built out in the Open edX platform and some of the other open source options is that these are cloud-based. So they're running on large data servers that provide an opportunity to scale to huge numbers. So you might be targeting an audience of 10, which it would work, or you might be targeting an audience of 150,000. And so it can accommodate that scale of students and the data as well. So what does this mean for authorship, ownership, and I added innovation? With the open source platforms, anyone can be an author. So we've worked with faculty members from Stanford and Harvard. We've seen a number of universities from Europe building out on top of it. We've seen nonprofit organizations like National Geographic and the Friday Institute. We've seen for-profit organizations launch courses on entrepreneurship. So there's really a lot of diversity and a lot of different access in using it as well. To the topic of ownership, and I know that ownership of content is very much a topic of dialogue. Within these platforms, it's the author that owns the content, so they can keep it to themselves, they can share it and redistribute it. It gives them that flexibility based on what their needs and their intentions are. But open source platforms provide even more areas around ownership. So in conversations with different organizations, we've heard they want to own the relationship with the students. So you go through a course, in 6 or 8 weeks, you're really building out that community. You want to continue that community perhaps after the course. Perhaps you want to offer another course. They want to be able to own that relationship rather than being dependent on an intermediary, and it provides that option. Others want to own the data. They want to do deep analysis on what the behaviors are for the students. They want to understand what learning and engagement looks like. So they build it out and they own the data. Google doesn't own the data. They own it and they have the opportunity to analyze it. And then there's a number of organizations and universities that want to own the brand. There are targeted intentions in building out a course, and they want to make sure that the message is very consistent and very clear. And there's no branding on this other than whatever the author chooses to use as well. But the area I'm most excited about is around the opportunity for innovation. So basically these are open source frameworks, and they provide an opportunity for people to customize and manipulate and adjust based on their interests. So a topic I've heard a lot the last 2 days is around pedagogy. How do you influence the design of these resources? And I envision a world where we've got strong education specialists collaborating with technologists together and building out those features and components to have a really rich learning experience. We've played with a couple different formats, with a couple different templates ourselves. We've seen in some areas it's been very successful in having it linear, some areas not as successful when it's linear, so it provides a lot more flexibility. There's also the option to customize features, so we've seen users of the platforms add badges, build out cohorts. We've seen some integrate coding environment, so it's a course on programming. They integrate that coding environment so the students can get real rich feedback embedded within the course. Huge opportunity for research that can inform further development. And then also there's a really rich opportunity for community contributions. So we've seen groups contribute code back around assessment features, around student dashboards. There's a group that launched an open source project called Opia, where it provides students real life feedback as they're going through. So as an author, you can anticipate questions. You give the students the experience as they're going through the questions and guiding their experience as well. So I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunity around the community. So I also want to realize that there's a lot of different options out there, and one isn't necessarily better than the other. I think what we're most excited about is based on whatever the organization is, whatever the problem might be, that there are different options available to them so they have a solution that they choose. So these are some questions that we ask groups that we talk with. Who do you want to be the author? Is the authorship open to anybody? Do you want full access to the data and the content? Do you want a hosted site therefore, or an unhosted site? Do you want to customize? Do you want to scale? And so there really, theoretically, should be options for every group based on what they're wanting to do. That said, we also realize from our own experiences, there's issues around access. Production is very expensive. Every course that we've tested in our experiments takes a lot of manpower, a lot of time. Distributing it to the right groups, you can't do that in isolation, in addition to localizing to language and context as well. So I think our theory in this space is there's no one perfect solution. It really is going to require collaboration across a number of organizations that have expertise in these different areas. And open source just provides one other option for groups. Sorry, Maureen.
Thank you very much. And
I realize it's very warm, so I will talk fast.
The theory that connects one with the other.
Hi, I'm Maureen McClure. I'm from the University of Pittsburgh. I've been looking at issues of online consultations in post-war, post-conflict economies since the Bosnian War, which is probably before some of you were born. And I've become very interested in MOOCs because of the possibility of being able to reach communities that may be difficult to reach otherwise. And more recently, my students have become very interested in post-disasters, earthquakes. We have a project on earthquakes, we have a project on post-tsunami, and we have a project on chronic disasters like hurricanes in the Caribbean. And so basically, right now, I just have a couple of questions to ask you. I'm a policy person. I'm not a technical person. And my issues are, let's start framing this so that as we end this and sort of start wrapping it up, is from a strategic point moving forward, what are some of the different ways we can start thinking about these issues in a way that fits into development? And as you can see, once we start asking the serious questions about who controls the rights to authorship and ownership, the issues become extremely complex because you have multiple interests often all going off in very different directions, which is why we have to hire high-priced lawyers like this guy to try to help sort things out. And so we have to begin with sort of more fundamental questions, is who owns the most rights to the issues of authorship? Not of our course content, but who owns development? And so who owns the authorship? Are they the educated people like us, or are they the affected people? And the issue of moral rights, which is usually about sort of artistic quality of content, but this notion of, does a person who creates something own the right to that creation in perpetuity? And in the United States, they're much more interested in, we do a lot of contract work and contracting, but in other countries, this is like France and Germany, it's a much bigger issue. And who owns the rights to strategy, authors, the investors? You notice Penn is a big investor in Coursera, so that made a difference in terms of how they thought about copyrights. And so the ownership issues and contractual rights become really important. And you've also heard a couple of different sort of core strategies that are being kind of floated around here. And one is this kind of elite education. Another is a sort of cooperative extension model. And I would suggest that perhaps together, they're very great alone, but they may be put together, might have some genuine usefulness that might be better. So there are many different ways of thinking about strategies. We can think about them as sort of global markets. There's a lot of companies that are starting to do MOOCs. There's a whole sort of shift in the industry. There's a shift to national governments starting to fund them as a way of promoting national economic development. You've got all the security people sort of saying, no, you can't export your MOOCs to certain countries because they're dangerous. And then you have this sort of kind of the grassroots, local to local kind of development that can be very useful. And the two different ways of thinking about it is one way, and they're both very important. One is to say, hey, we know something, and we're here to help. And if you've been watching the Donald Rumsfeld movie, we're dealing with the known knowns here in terms of being able to teach stuff, to be able to diagnose problems, and be able to work as efficiently as possible. Where in the cooperative extension model, it's much more like we're neighbors, and we're collectively, in a participative way, are trying to figure out how we're going to be able to do this. And there's an issue of public security that becomes a really important thing here. One thing we don't want to lose track of is that we have this global generation that we're trying to address, and the needs are absolutely overwhelming. The UN talks about a responsibility to protect, and usually in the refugee camps it's sort of physical protection. But we also need to start thinking about generational responsibility to help protect the future so that it becomes sustainable for the generations after. And so therefore we can look back to the history of MOOCs, where radio and TV and all of these things in the past have been quite helpful in terms of dealing with very large numbers, and MOOCs can be able to do that too. The demand over 1 billion people between 15 and 24. That's big. What we don't want to do is leave here with, I don't know if you can read this, but it says, no, I have no idea where your next meal is going to come from. So we don't want to show up with all our tech and not be able to address the issues that are most central. And it's been delightful. The people here have been very sensitive to that. Well, how can elite education help? Well, the one wonderful thing about Coursera and other MOOCs like this is that they are radically convenient. I mean, there are no loose ends. I just 3 clicks I'm into a course, 3 clicks I'm out. It's wonderful. It has it's a complete package. Everybody's taking care of the licenses. Everybody's done all the stuff for me. It manages all kinds of stuff. And so I don't have to worry about it. So if I'm a national government and I'm worried about teacher education for 500,000 or 600,000 people, I might really go for something like this. The other thing too is that these folks tend to track telecom with engineering schools. These are ways that they can be able to help because they can push right through on the edge. Notice I mentioned one good thing for them is to support national professional certification programs. So rather than the grassroots kind of thing, working with national governments, supporting institutional capacity building, negotiating permanent use for open access materials, those kinds of things can help strengthen governments. Now normally these are not the kinds of things that we think about in developed countries, but in developing countries they become absolutely essential. Cooperative extension models, you often see, and remember there's a lot of overlap, they can go close to the ground, they're non-formal. These are the guys who have been out there promoting open educational resources, the Creative Commons, supporting radically low-cost publishing, which is becoming increasingly more important. They're ignoring the copyrights by using other kinds of resources, but staying close to the idea of community development. And this is not necessarily a very good place for the expert MOOCs, because you need that package to be able to be delivered with the bandwidth, everything we've been talking about. But the idea of distributed platforms, etc., is a much better thing. Bring your own device, blend in with older tech. And I was interested that the guy from FutureLearn in Brussels sort of giving you an image of a BBC strategy, which I thought was very clever, and sort of expanding it out of education. I had thought that the FutureLearn was very clever because unlike the kind of global network that Coursera and edX had set up, what they had done was give a national voice. Like here's the British Council, and they not only picked universities, but they also chose national cultural institutions like the British Museum and the library. And so this idea of the projection of a national voice, I thought was really very clever. Things to think about: context matter, as you can see here. And we need to think about what are the common things. We don't need to think about employability over one hand and governance over the other. We've got kids we have to teach how to think critically in both kinds of environments. We need much more focus on international credentials for mobility purposes, because we have disasters and we have droughts and we have big issues, and we've got to start looking at and perhaps UNESCO might be, or ILO might be a way of being able to think about some of these, but UNESCO can certainly help with issues of open access, international copyrights, permanent collections of OERs, and working with governments on that. How many of you are familiar with the concept of an American corner? Libraries will have a little American corner. Well, if you have, that might be some way to think about it in a library. Here are the like the National Voice. Here are American authors doing American things, and we'll put it in your library for free. So that might be one way. British Council has a different kind of model. Both of them have been very successful. Need for sustainability. We've talked a lot about that. I'm asking you, do not succumb to conference fever. This is one that says, you've told me a lot about all the problems here, but how can you show me an example of how you're actually solving them? And many of you have done that, so you can go home feeling, you don't have to feel guilty. Things to think about. There's an undercurrent here that we need at some point to talk about. And that is tech culture, what are the unanticipated consequences? Is tech culture an invasive species? You have the Putnam's problem. How many of you know the bowling alone? The idea is that technology in users can encourage passivity, isolation, and detachment, and that's not healthy. How do we do that? You've heard about the pushback problem, and there have been big national policy issues in language-oriented there are a lot of tension between how much English are you going to teach and how much local languages. Indonesia's been lurching back from one. They sort of lurched into heavy emphasis on English, and now they're lurching back to Indonesia. And those poor kids, I just feel sorry for them. Korea's another lot of it. And then there's this notion of the blowback problem, where people are thinking of constructing this, where people who are really trying to do good work are being seen as, hey, wait a minute, this is a new form of colonialism. So we talked about we see everybody's got the same two generations of thinking. The first is from my point of view, is we've looked at the democratization of content and created new demand. And that's been wonderful and sometimes threatening to other people. Second generation is something the MOOCs and the Canadians have been doing for a long time, but it hasn't really hit yet, and I think it's going to be absolutely central to work in countries with relatively low tech, and that's a democratization of platforms by generating new sources of supply. And once that starts happening, that will be destabilizing. It will be destabilizing for higher ed institutions, for publishing companies, you name it. And that's something that we've got to start taking a little more seriously. And I don't know where you are, but that's sort of where I'm on.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think this panel speaks volumes about the design of a conference, bringing together voices from different perspectives and different areas. We've heard from an institutional point of view, they have found their solution for a MOOC, and this is the way it's done, this is the recipe. If you guys want to follow this, here's all the details, and very smart details at that. To the largest company in the world, arguably the most pervasive one as well, doing good with education, creating a platform to put for everyone's use, and then to an NGO's perspective in the context of disaster areas, war zones, again, asking the questions, the right questions in terms of design. So I think we're all represented in there, and I'm sure there are many, many questions. So I would ask you to ask your questions. If it is directed specifically to one panelist, to name who you are, who you're addressing the question to, or is it for the whole panel? So please, the room is yours. Yes.
So Nicole Allen from Spark. First of all, I think this was the most practical and down-to-earth panel for the entire conference. So thank you, and thank you for really providing a step-by-step look about how this actually works. My question is about open licensing in the context of copyright permissions. I'm interested in all three of you, the extent to which leveraging openly licensed materials has supported your work, or you've incorporated mechanisms to support the use of openly licensed
In terms of Penn, and Martha Brogan from the library has led this up, the library has played an important role in supporting faculty members who normally, in preparing their courses, just reach for the chart or the picture that they have closest to hand. And because we are sensitive to the copyright issues, the library has cooperated, providing a variety of materials to help faculty members find open source, open license sorts of materials that they can include in the MOOCs in place of the scientific journal chart that is going to cost us X dollars to license. So it's something that once you start thinking about this as a quasi-publishing venture, then you immediately go in that direction, and it's important to provide support for faculty members on how to navigate that world of materials.
I'll go next. So by the design of the platform, it's open source, we leave it up to the authors for them to determine what materials they're going to use, how they're going to use them, and also how people contribute their own content, moves the content themselves. Of the courses that we've launched, two of our most recent ones, we realized, hey, this is some cool content that people might want to use, so we've Creative Commons licensed it for others to use as well, so they can access it. One we just finished, it's called Making Sense of Data, and it provides some really basic data analysis techniques to others, and the other is on accessibility. So we're trying as much as we can. Again, we're not in the content business, we're more in the experimentation. But the time that we've put into it, we realize others might benefit and be interested in this as well. But we leave it up to the other authors, and they're using the platform for them to decide.
Does your platform include a capability to mark Creative Commons licensed content?
Great question. That's something we've talked about. I think that there's a really important opportunity there. I mean, there's a lot of really rich dialogue around how do you tap into repositories as well. I think we've just started. There's so much potential out there, but that's definitely something that we've talked about.
I have one small thing to say. Whatever you do, don't think about this only as a technical issue. This is a huge political issue, because anytime a lot of money is at stake, one way or another, it's a huge political issue. And the force of gravity that comes into those publishing companies whose livelihoods are being chronically threatened by this is generating a lot of pushback in Congress and in other places. And so if you want to get into this, just don't be naive about it. Just start being a little more realistic. You'll need it.
Combating that is my job.
Thank you. Does that answer?
Absolutely.
Very well. Stephen?
I want to raise the question of silos. I know it's not directly related to copyright and fee licensing, but it is kind of related. And we have some good people at the front to ask about that in the form of Google and Coursera especially. And I want to ask whether you are using license policies in order to break down silos and promote interactivity between providers, between websites, between, say, social networking services, and if not, why not? If you are pursuing a silo approach with Google, then I'd like to know how you reconcile that with a public proposition that we are supporting open source, we are supporting open content.
So I guess that's for me.
I think it's for you and for me. Go first if you'd like.
Two on the end.
Yes.
Coursera's, you talked a lot about the licensing and not permitting reuse
Right.
and all of that.
So let me address it from a Penn perspective, because I work for the University of Pennsylvania. I don't work for Coursera.
Yeah.
So the Coursera is a for-profit company. They have venture capitalists. They have a variety of social goals, but they also eventually need to make some money. And they are not open source. The content that the universities provide is not open source. Universities could make their content open source, but most of us, indeed, as far as I know, all of us have chosen not to make our content open source, in part because our faculty authors are jealous of control, and in part because the university needs to make this sustainable if we're going to continue doing this, economically sustainable. Okay, so, we're not an open source is not our ethos. On the other hand, the university partners are acutely sensitive to what happened to the record companies and the music publishers. And so what you might call the iTunes threat is something that the university partners are extremely sensitive to. It's part of the reason why in the agreement with Coursera, the university, and edX for that matter, the university partners keep ownership over the IP and ultimately control over the IP. It's also part of the reason why the leading university partners with Coursera are to varying degrees pursuing a platform-neutral strategy. There's long been, from the beginning, there's been a sensitivity about being tied unduly to a given platform. The most developed platform-neutral strategy can be seen on Stanford's Open Stanford website, where they have a variety of courses that they offer online, and you'll see with each of the courses, there's the name of the course, and it'll basically say powered by Coursera, powered by Venture Lab, powered by edX, powered by whatever. So that, to use the commercial language, the branding is Stanford. But more importantly, control is Stanford. So that while universities tend to be, in I guess your terms, silos, I'm not keen to have one of my faculty members, one of my colleagues, teach on the Princeton team in addition to teaching on the Penn team, and we allow people to visit, but you have to ask permission and so forth. The great attraction of Penn is I have such great colleagues, and if they go teach every place else too, that obviously is considered to be a problem. So we are silos without a doubt, but we, I think, are silos with an enlightened sense of our self-interest.
So, no, we've not actively tried to break down some of those silos with the different providers. I think the key reason behind this is MOOCs are still pretty new and they're evolving. We're all trying to figure out how are they sustainable, how can we scale. No one has the answers right now. So I think what we're most interested in is having a lot of different experiments and tests, be it Coursera, Udacity, Udemy. I think we're all trying to figure out what that might look like down the road. So I don't think that there's one solution. I think what we've been trying to do is identify where there are some gaps, give people options, but also encourage a really broad dialogue. I think an area where we can all improve is opening a bit more what we're learning. I think that we've learned from mistakes ourselves. I think we've learned there's a lot of access to data, and I'd like to see a bit more dialogue in that space. But we've not intentionally tried to break down, as you say, Steve, the silos there. So I think it's a time of exploration.
Maureen, do you want to add anything, or? I'll not try to put you on the spot.
No, I just always add the political.
Yes.
Because you have the political economy problem, which is chronic. So on one hand, you have people have the right to control the authorship of their work. They have the right to earn money for it. And if we give it all away for free, then how am I going to make my mortgage? That's a real problem. And I have the right to earn money. On the other hand, I have an obligation to protect the next generation, and I want to be able to share, and I want to be able to. So we have here what we call a wicked problem, and a wicked problem is one that cannot be solved. It's one that can be mitigated, but it can't be solved. The only thing you come up with different balances depending on the time.
And
This is definitely a wicked problem.
It is, and in all fairness, Stephen's answer was question was very loaded, and in the back of my mind in a different manner, the matter being like, what do we know of our content that we put with Google in the future? Where is it going to be, and who is it going to belong to, and what is being done with it? And I guess there are public questions about that, because typically we don't read the licenses or we don't understand the licenses fully, but we're all Google users. I run a MOOC, and Stephen, his MOOCs are mostly using Google tools. So there is a paradox there, and the paradox brings questions, and I guess it's fair to ask them, but maybe not
It
from
is,
you.
yeah, that's fine. And
We need a good contract lawyer.
Let me follow up on your comment. So, one of the questions I get a lot, especially from alumni groups and trustees, is why is Penn doing this? Why are we putting in a not insignificant amount of money into developing these MOOCs that we're putting up on the web, on the platform, basically for free? They are for free. And, the core answer, I mean, there are a bunch of different answers we give, but the core answer is that we're a research university, which means that our mission is the creation and dissemination of knowledge. And the knowledge that we create is largely created here on campus. And the dissemination, we give knowledge away for free, and we always have. We publish, we put stuff out, we talk about it in journals, we talk about it all sorts of places where we get nothing back for. And that's core to the university's mission. And we figure out ways to make enough money to support this lovely campus and all of us who work for it. But it is a non-trivial part of our mission that we are, our mission is to give away the knowledge that we create. And to make that possible and to maximize that and to maximize our ability to continue to put courses up for the benefit of whoever wants to use it. And I think the delivery is a critical priority, because we know the knowledge and we know how to teach Penn students. We don't know how to teach students in developing countries. Only the people who teach them now know how to teach them. So the partnerships are of the essence of delivery. But for us to continue to invest the kind of resources that we are investing, we need to make it sustainable. And so the kind of balance between openness and closeness, between giving stuff away but maintaining control through copyright or contract or another way is actually of the essence of being able to continue to share our teaching resources with the rest of the world.
Thanks, Ed. Anyone else for a question? Maybe in the back first.
Yes, good that we have a lawyer, and I'd like to ask this question with respect to an experiment we had recently in Tanzania with the World Bank team for a learning hub, which was created by young kids precisely to harvest whatever is available in the open from Coursera. So we did Coursera and two other platforms. That was last year. The Learning Hub created a course with 4 or 5 streams that for those who passed the courses there, they were given the opportunity to be interned. These are 3rd and 4th year students in the university. They were given the opportunity to work in the private sector that the project dealt with in supplying the human resource. So in other words, it's like a for-profit venture in that sense. So the question I have is, are they not, because there's a value-add proposition to what they're doing, which means to say it's a blended learning. So the value proposition there was that there was the value add to these kids who were given the courses were on IT, because there was a huge demand for IT, for example, to support the computer security in the provincial hospital there. So the question is, are these learning hubs not violating any copyright or DRMs or laws by doing so? And I have another question. The second question is, you said that the UPenn discussion with contract with Coursera was $50,000 for developing the course?
What I said is that it costs us around $50,000 to develop a MOOC.
Okay, good.
The contract with Coursera is we don't pay them anything, they don't pay us anything. If there are revenues from the course, then there is a revenue share agreement built into the contract as to how those revenues are divided. So Coursera's revenue stream comes from its share of monetizing the MOOCs. And the principal means of monetizing the MOOCs now is the so-called signature track, where for an identity verified certificate, you pay $39 or $49 depending on the course. On your first question, on the learning hubs, under the terms of use, the Coursera terms of use, the materials can be used in that kind of configuration without permission. But I know that we've worked with the World Bank. At one point they wanted to use some of our Wharton courses for training purposes. And we were quite free in giving permission. We were quite keen to see if the courses could be put to good use. So the short answer is, where you want to use the courses for something like that, just contact Coursera and they will facilitate a contact with the university, and I'm quite certain the university will say yes. But as a legal matter, one in that circumstance needs permission to use the course.
Actually, my second question was about the breakdown of the 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
You said that out of the 50,000, teacher stipend is 15,000, is that right?
These are only some of the Penn courses. Some of the Penn courses are developed by individual schools which have their own arrangements with their faculty. For the internal grants model, the ones that are supported out of the provost's office where I work, we provide a stipend to the instructor to prepare the course of $15,000, which most instructors view as little more than a large box of chocolates given the unbelievable number of hours it takes to develop the course. Okay. We then also provide for support in terms of teaching assistants, another $15,000, because for developing these courses, you need to have several teaching assistants both to develop the course and to run the course the first time. So it's the basic breakdown is 15 for stipend, 15 for teaching assistants. Videotaping is somewhere between 10 and 15, and copyright is somewhere around 5. Depending on the course, it can be much less. But so our rule of thumb, our ballpark number for developing the courses in the university is out of pocket, not counting any overhead, is about $50,000.
Thank you, I'm taking notes as well. Sorry, I had Rory first.
Yeah, referring to the terms of reference, it says that you cannot use your Coursera certificate for accreditation with any other institution. And like, what's the rationale behind that? And is it legally possible to enforce that?
So we don't give credit for these courses because, first of all, they aren't the same as university courses. I think they're valuable, but they're not the same as the courses we teach on campus. So we don't give credit. The course we have that is closest to being identical to a course we teach on campus is the single variable calculus course, taught by Professor Grice, who I saw was here this morning. And there, basically, we ultimately treat it as we treat advanced placement credit. Currently, any student who has taken the course who thinks that she knows single variable calculus is free to take the advanced placement test math department prepares every year and administers, or simply to go into multivariable calculus, get B- or above, and then retroactively count. As to the rest, these are non-credit courses, and so from our perspective, we're not standing behind any learning outcomes of those courses. And that's for two reasons. One is the content is different, and the second is, while the signature track does a tolerable job of controlling the identity fraud problem, it does nothing to prevent cheating. Nothing at all, okay? So we have no way of knowing whether the person who shows up with the certificate actually did the work. And we have had cases, it is somewhat remarkable that there is cheating that goes on in these courses because they're not for credit and they're free, right? On the other hand, people cheat at solitaire, right? And so, there is this deep human, so I don't know why people cheat at solitaire, but they do, right? So, in terms of, it's far too early for, I think, for these certificates to be taken at face value for any other institution. I think every institution has to ask themselves, does this person who's showing up with a certificate have the degree of competence in the field that we think meets our standards? Which I think the best way to do that is to have the equivalent of our math department's advanced placement test, that you can demonstrate proficiency in single variable calculus. If you do, you get credit. If you don't, take the course again.
But why wouldn't you leave that to the other institutions and put in a legal prohibition against somebody saying, going to Thomas Edison or
Well,
some
because
other...
I think in this early stage, I don't know that the other institution will understand what it is that the person's showing up with. That's my concern. I don't want them to be misled by the pen name on the certificate. So if they were misled, I think I'd be upset about that, because I think, I would feel that we were somehow complicit in that because we've agreed to put our names on the certificate. So I sort of, we have that on there as sort of a caveat emptor for other institutions so that they form their own judgment as to whether this meets their standards.
But if you can't do it, what can you use the certificate
Rory,
for?
It's suitable for
if you don't mind, maybe you guys can take it after, because there were at least 2 other questions, please. Didn't you have a question? Yes? Oh, I thought I saw, okay, there was one right there.
There's a slide, you want to get out of here, as to the rest of us.
Since Ed kindly mentioned Penn Library's role in helping to clear rights for use of third-party materials in Coursera, I just wanted to mention we have put together a guide, and I'm happy to share the URL with some of our advice to faculty. It is geared particularly towards Coursera, but it does have other information that may be useful there. For example, there's a link to a video of a panel we had a year ago with 3 copyright experts, Kevin Smith, who's at Duke, Kenny Cruz, who is at Columbia, talking about copyright considerations for MOOCs. And there's also a PowerPoint presentation from an attorney at the University of Virginia talking about legal issues from the faculty or the author perspective. So there are a lot of good links there. If anybody would like it, I can share.
You should also look at Open Learning at Penn, which is our website that is full of really wonderful material on both for faculty on how to prepare a MOOC, as well as for TAs and how to support a MOOC.
Sorry. I did have just one other comment when it's appropriate.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I did want to make just a clarification to a comment that you had said, so respectfully. It was that Google owns people's data and content, and that's not, we don't own individuals' content. People have full control of their content on the web. I know this is outside of the MOOC context, but just want to clarify. So at any point, if someone wants to remove it or delete it, they have that right. I think the question earlier on was opening it up, having it less siloed, but I did just want to clarify that we don't own other people's content. People own their content themselves.
I think I said it was a concern,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah, or it could be used for privacy purposes, but you're
Privacy
absolutely,
important to us, yeah.
yes, please.
I have a question on how you incentivize teachers to create the MOOCs course, or like what, there be financial support so that they can have enough resources to create and library has to support, but how incentivize the teachers?
So setting aside the meager financial returns, we haven't actually had to incentivize the teachers, because the prospect of being able to teach 50 or 100,000 people around the world in a subject that they love is really one that they find really very appealing. Within schools, I think every school has handled this differently. So the Wharton School, which has been very active in developing open online business content, There, the incentive came when I went to see, early on in my tenure, I went to see the dean and the deputy dean and told them the University of Michigan had put up a corporate finance course taught by Gudum Call that had 160,000 enrollees. That provided an incentive for Wharton to move quickly into developing online business MOOCs. And they galvanized their faculty and moved incredibly quickly. So, you know, some schools are motivated by preserving the brand, if you will, by competition with peer institutions. In other cases, it is it is a desire to reach different populations. So we have a course for the medical school on basic vaccine science taught by Paul Offit. He's written a book on it. He teaches in the department. His view is that anti-vaccine crazies pose a severe public health hazard. He has a book that lays out basic vaccine science, and he wants to make an interjection in the public debate over vaccines, and the MOOC is an incredible platform for public education. As it happens, the sales of his book went up when his MOOC was streamed. Perfectly sensible. So it really, you have to ask each instructor what motivates them. We are there to support them. We try to make it as easy as possible for instructors to offer MOOCs, to develop MOOCs, so that it's not just the technically sophisticated early adopters who are the ones out there. They were certainly in our first wave. We basically want to have enough support in place so that any faculty member who has the interest in offering a MOOC can develop one. But we do not go to faculty members and say, with rare exceptions, I think Maureen did this, we don't generally go to faculty members and say, we want you to offer a MOOC. Instead, we put out a call for proposals and wait for faculty members to come to us and say, we want to develop.
Thank you. Briefly, 20 or 30 seconds each, closing comments, ownership, authorship.
Huge opportunities, and we've just started to explore what's possible.
Thank you.
Make sure it's linked to sustainability issues.
We're producing very high quality digital content, but high quality content won't change the world unless it's partnered with high quality delivery.
Very good. Well, I invite you to extend your thank you.